You've got a construction going past the driveway. Sorry, a driveway construction going past a couple of trees.
Well,
And
they've asked my advice about it, and I've said no excavation at all. And I think they're probably not going to proceed, but I'd be interested to know, could they use the existing pavers that are between the trees to drive over?
I can't see why not, but I can't see why they can't replace those existing pavers and put a concrete driveway in.
Well, they're talking about when I've looked at the civil drawings, they're looking at cutting in, and the driveway would have to be 150 plus 50 under, 200, 225 mil, which is much thicker than what the pavers would be.
Yeah, there will be. The pavers will probably be 50 years, but the pavers will probably be on a bed of another 50. There's 100. The question is, why does the concrete need to be 200 mils deep?
I don't know. I just had when I've researched, it's in Northbridge, and I've researched the council documents. It said residential driveways were 125 plus a bed of 75. If it was commercial, it would equal 225. So the levels they're looking in, they're looking at cutting in on one side to change the gutters and whatnot, but it's inside the structural root zone. So I suppose, yeah, you know a lot more than I do about this.
I mean, there's lots of variables, and Peter and I were just discussing it before we came in. I'll just share if I can. Now I'm not sure where share is, Peter. I know it's there somewhere.
It's not sharing yet, but you're also not. You've got the camera turned off, so maybe.
Yes, I've got the camera. I've got the camera turned off on purpose to reduce bandwidth. But I'm not sure
from sharing
where the sharing button is. Let's see.
Top right, is it?
I got it. I had to change it to full view, entire screen, and entire screen, share. Okay. So I've got this driveway that's essentially so that people can see that's going between two trees. This is our view here between the two trees. I'm sorry, it's small, guys. I'm running on a laptop remotely, so it's hard for me to do much change. Let me see. I'll see if I can enlarge that. Zoom, yeah, I can. That's better. Okay, I'll just move that across a bit. Assuming it'll let me do that as well. Yeah. That's more problematic than I thought. Move you guys out of the way. So this is the existing pavers that has been discussed here, and we're talking about, from what Vicky was saying, a commercial driveway, some description going in.
Well, they're going to do a residential build, actually. That's what they want to do.
Yeah, so again, I don't know where these rules come from, but a number of years ago I was asked whether we could put a driveway past a tree in Bondi, and my answer was yes, we could. We could actually do it in less depth than the current footpath, and that was to do a steel crossover, textured steel crossover. And the next thing is they said, well, we can't do that because, we'll be burdened with the cost of replacing it when the time comes. And I thought, well, that could be addressed by a condition of consent, one. And two, I don't know who's worrying about stuff that's happening in a few hundred years' time, but we're talking about a few hundred years' time for a piece of 25 mil plate steel to get to the stage where it would need to be replaced. Then the slip issue was raised, and we said, well, there's splatter coatings now available, so you can splatter coat it so that it's rough texture. So there are options out there. But the other question is, how big a root are we going to find, and is it going to be an issue? And about 3 years ago, I did a project where we cut a 170 mil diameter root, 700 mils from the base of a black butt. So fairly close, sort of similar sort of distances as you might be looking at here. And that tree's still doing quite well. So trees are tolerant of losing a root. In fact, they're all tolerant of losing first order lateral roots to the trunk. Not that we necessarily want to do that, but there's this constant trade-off between tree retention and building. And in my view, a good end outcome is trees retained, trees healthy, and development done with a suitable density and yield for those parties involved. And so I'm inclined to want to push things. And I said last time, anyone that wanted to dare me to go up to Port Douglas, I'd go there. Well, I didn't get to Port Douglas. I stopped at Palm Cove, just north of Cairns this morning. And I thought I'd share with you some of the trees so that you get an idea where construction and trees can come together. A friend, Sean Tallant, recommended I go and see this a while ago. But that's a building in behind. It's doing fairly poorly for itself. The building's fine. The tree's doing fine. Here, there's some trees on the other side. That's the tree you just looked at. Again, full canopy, Melaleuca leucodendra. And it's not just one. There are dozens and dozens of these trees in the one development where they said, look, we're retaining the trees. There's pavement all the way around. Now, I know that pavement also meant, because it's load bearing, it means either concrete underneath or at least a consolidated zone underneath it to stop the pavers from moving through the buildings. Leaning tree, by the way, I mean, I always find that interesting. I know that one day that tree's going to fall over, but I wonder how many more years or decades we're going to have to wait. And these trees are everywhere breaking the rules. That's inside a building. And as you go back from that building, you get this view. These are all inside buildings. Look at the canopies. Not saying that you'd want to do that to every tree. I'm just saying they did that to every tree. I mean, you know, I don't think you get much more cramped than that. Services have gone in, and those services have to be underground. So we know that there's been some root loss. This is the Visitor Information Centre. I think that just speaks testimony. And this is a 1980s development. So I wonder what they knew back in the 1980s that we don't know now. And I think one of the that's important in their knowledge is they didn't know they couldn't do it. That's the critical thing. I'll come back to that in a second. Again, in the middle of pavement, in the middle of roads, concrete around, that's concrete beam. You know, there's got to have been some damage to the tree in that process. You know, growing through roofs, just mind-boggling. Yeah, pushing against the building. This wall will eventually crack. There'll eventually be getting enough pressure. It's unlikely that they engineered this wall correctly. And that's just an oversight. There's nothing wrong. They could have designed it better if they had more information. This is looking at a roof from the top and looking down. This is it from the underside. These are in wells. I don't like well. In my view, they would have been better off letting the dirt go all the way up to the trunk and let new roots grow. This is Melaleuca. It will have put roots in very rapidly if it had the chance. Again, way closer than our 12 times trunk diameter, and there has to be extensive construction below grade here. So, you know, they come in 3 or 4 or 5 times trunk diameter. and done the building. It just speaks testimony to the resilience of trees. I'm not saying you'd want to do that, as I said, to every tree. I have to say this was an interesting one. This is Melaleuca Resort, and you bet it. Like all good naming systems, that's named because they have no Melaleucas on the property at all. Tall Tree Street means there's not a tall tree. Peppercorn Street, there's not a shyness. It's just the way they think. That's just, again, a relic of bad habits. This is spiking up coconut palms. They'll tolerate it, but wow, how vile does it look? And there are other ways of dealing with it. So hopefully, Vicky, this gives you some encouragement that trees are incredibly tolerant. Given the opportunity, they will do fairly well. I mean, look at that. Just incredible. Now, this is even more incredible. There's the window of the bistro and the pub. There's a concrete wall there, so that's got to have some form of footing to it. In here, this is in the pizzeria, and you can see they've had to put glass around the trunk to stop the trunk from catching fire in the pizzeria. Now, what commitment is that? I just think it's brilliant. And yes, again, we've got this wall, we've got this concrete floor. So I'm pretty sure it's fair to say this tree has a lot of construction pressure on it. Now, I will say, in fairness, we've got sandy loams, probably over sand, and there'll be a freshwater aquifer that's coming through and draining out into the ocean, as is typical when we're getting close to waterfronts. So water pressure pushes the saline water back, and the pressure or the head of the water coming down from your slopes and from your surrounding land washes the salt water out. So there'll be a layer down at some depth there that is fresh water. And then probably the piece of resistance is this tree is just magnificent in the middle of the bar. That's a pool table corner there. I mean, is this acceptable under the standard? My answer is yes, this is acceptable. We need to figure out how to push things more. What the builders didn't know is what they couldn't do. And what we've spent our time doing is saying to them, you can't do this. And I think the net result, if we'd stuck with that mentality when that was being done, it'd have been devastating. We would have had none of the trees. So, Vicky, I would say some root exploration. If they wanted to pursue it, find out how big the roots are, run them through the root loss calculator, and then from there you can make an intelligent and informed decision.
Yeah, I've suggested that they'd have to pull up all the pavers and do root exploration. But I think the civil drawing they wanted to cut down 200 mil on the northern side, the furthest side from one side of the trees. They want to cut down 200 mil, but you probably can't do that unless you do the root exploration. Is that correct?
I think that would be a smart move to do it. I wouldn't say all the pavers. I'd just simply say a line along the edge of where they're going to excavate.
Okay, because the engineers suggested preformed concrete bridging over the area of the roots so that it would fit in either side.
The dilemma is they won't allow, in general, most cities won't allow any elevation of the driveway that can't be quickly feathered with a little bit of soil. And so that's hence why I was saying plate steel. Plate steel is 25 mils thick, or thereabouts an inch thick, and it can be just put on piers and run in without any problems at all. It's getting them to think differently about it, and many cities will say no, that's not acceptable.
So if we just did the root mapping along the edges of the driveway, removed the pavers along there and dug down by hand to look at what was there and how deep they were and how large the roots were.
Yeah, and then run it through the calculator, and then you've got an idea of what you're looking at. But, trees are incredibly tolerant, and hopefully those pictures just showed you mind-bogglingly tolerant they can be. Now, I do accept as I said, this is sandy loam, so a lot more sinker roots, very few lateral roots. You'll notice from Melaleuca there was no lifting of the surrounding surfaces. But we don't know what you've got until you start to dig. And the number of times I've sat there and thought, oh, well, we're going to have something huge, and we've had, relatively small things. It's quite high.
Okay, that's helpful.
As I said, on something this is over 1.5 meters in diameter, I would have said, look, if you cut 200 mil root on that tree, it's not even going to notice it. It's not even going to miss a beat. It sounds a horrible thing, but again, we can re-stimulate the number of absorbing roots lost probably in 6 to 8 weeks. So as long as we're prepared to put the F in, we should be fine. So hopefully that answers that one for you.
Thank you.
That's the path I would take, is root investigation in that situation, just because they're not your client's trees, and you can't have a big grade changes in close. So next one.
Mark, if you did find some roots and did the calculation, you're saying that would inform your decision, but where would the upper limit be? 30% of the root?
I'm comfortable with 30% almost any time. If you want to go beyond 30%, I think then you've got to start thinking it through. And the reason I'm happy to take out 1/3 at any time is a basal, let's say a fire came through, a Holden Commodore swerved off the road, hit the base of the tree, knocked off a whole pile of bark and caught on fire. And we had a big scald on one side. It's lost 1/3 of its root system. We wouldn't cut the tree down at that stage. 20 years later, it's starting to decay. 50 years later, we have a cavity. But we've lost all those roots and the tree's still going. And we see trees with 1/3 openings, and we know a tree with a cavity with a 1/3 opening is as stable as a normal tree. So that's the first thing, stability is dealt with. And the second thing is it's functioning without those roots. So every root that was connected with that base of cavity has gone. And
I would have thought that excavating only 200 mil down, you'd be lucky to get anywhere near 30% of root loss.
I would think so, Peter. That's what I'm saying. Getting that evidence is, I think, an important part. I hate root mapping with a vengeance, but you're close to the trunks of the tree, and you're talking about the council's trees, and a 200 mil deep root map, particularly once the papers are gone, and you've just done the first 50. I bet you there's a 50 mil sand bed, so I've just done the first 100. Vicky needs to dig another 100 deep and record the information. And I know that the biggest root she's going to find in that zone is 100 mils, in all probability, because she's only digging 100 mils deep. She's not going down 300 mils. She might find something a bit bigger. But, if she does find 150 mil diameter root on a Lephostomen, it sounds horrible, but they tolerate it.
Yeah.
And they tolerate it. I can give you a site you can go have a look at in Hunters Hill. There's some shops, and the corner is a sharp sort of acute corner comes out unusual. The development there is right beside some Lephostomen converters, and they're excavated down for a basement. You don't see the basement when you're there, but when you realise there's a basement there and see how close they are, you think, yeah, okay, they've lost every root on that side, not just some roots. And tree roots, we describe them as being 600 deep, but I can tell you the tree roots can often be deeper. Michael is on the line now. It's in Western Australia, and I just saw Arbor Centre did some, Bob Bowden stuff, did some beautiful Columbia transplants very recently, probably 500 mil diameter trunks, and the roots were down 2.5, 3 meters, big roots. So again, soil has a huge impact on what we're going to see, as does genetics. So hopefully that answers. Next one. Got to go down in size now. Unfortunately, it's the only way I can do it. Okay. Very quick one from Graham. Graham's asked about some dead trees, and if I can swap that around, I will. But you got the idea. It's a horrible out of focus shot, but some trees that are dead that have got to be retained. They're habitat trees. And how long will they last? I have no idea. But I do have some answers. That's an unusual situation. Usually I've got some idea and no answer. But this time I've got no idea and some answers. And the no ideas, I don't know how long they're going to last for. I know of some trees that were girdled, ring-barked, in the 1950s and 1960s in a national park, before it became a national park. And those dead trees are still standing. So that's 60, 70 years. That's a fair time. I also know that sometimes push a Eucalyptus nicolai over in Sydney, within 4 or 5 years of it dying. It just decays that rapidly. So it does depend on species. But what I would do is put a throw line over and just give a light load test. If you can pull it over easily with one hand, it probably shouldn't be there. If you can't pull it over, then there's not going to be enough wind blowing on it to get enough force or pressure to blow it over. And those of you who've been around with me doing a school inspection, we load test smaller trees, dead trees. We just simply push on them and say, what's the root system doing? Can we see movement? If I push and it gets to about 25 or 30 degrees, I always check to make sure I push to completion. Then I'll push it to completion. If it's in a really critical spot and I push on it and I see it moving, then I'd go to isolation. So that's how I'd handle that. And I think that's a reasonable process. The trees need to be retained here for ecological reasons, dead trees, and I don't see any problems with doing that. But periodically, you're going to have to pull on them. Sean Tallant, again, mentioned his name earlier. Sean Tallant looks after a tree that was moved in 2 parts from Victoria to Sydney and erected for a ropes climbing course. And they want to know whether the branches are going to drop off. They've been cut back, so it's a dead stump tree. And the answer there is he throws up a throw pouch over the parts that they're most worried about, give a tug. If giving a tug breaks it off, then it's no longer there. It's no longer a problem. If it doesn't break off, then it's not going to break off under the weight of gravity for probably the next 5 or 10 years. So that's how I'd handle Graham's issue. Graham, you online?
Don't think so.
Has anyone else got any thoughts on that? Anything else to add? No? Okay, great. We're making some progress. This one is another one from Vicky. Oh, Vicky, this is horrible. I don't know. I've got no idea. We've got a fungus growing on the side of a tree. It looks saprophytic. It looks like a jelly fungus, but it's not something that I'm familiar with. So I cannot help. Have you tried Google imaging it and seeing whether Google finds anything or Lens finds anything?
Yeah, I haven't been able to find anything, but yeah, that's okay.
That's okay. Again, not seen anything like it, but I'd want to know what it is now, you see. That's the hard bit. And someone was saying to me just yesterday, or day before yesterday, that Botanic Gardens have stopped doing DNA identification, but I think that might only be for roots. But yeah, taking one of the sporocarps down and having it identified if you want to get any further. I can't say I've ever seen it.
Okay, yeah, I could do that.
I assume it's based in Sydney.
Yes, it's in Seaforth.
And it's a dead stem or like
It's a dead stem.
Yeah, so it's some form of saprophytic fungi. And the problem with that is there's lots of saprophytes out there, and they're not a problem for us as arborists because they're not doing anything else but eating dead tissue. So if that's a dead stem, I would just simply cut it off and fill comfortable that it's not the cause of the decline. In terms of certainty, no, I'm not, but I'd be 99% certain that the common pathogenic fungi that we deal with is something that I'll have seen. So I'd be really surprised if that was a saprophytic fungi. As I said, reminds me of one of the jelly type fungi, and they're always saprophytic.
Okay, thanks.
This one came from Peter Gray, straight after, I think a day or two after we discussed fungi. And it's a big shelf fungi on a fig. Again, I assume, Peter?
Yeah.
Up your end of the world. And I remember looking at some at Alstonville that looked like this. I think this is a Ganoderma. White on the underside, very narrow. And you can see just on the top side here, let me see if I can make that a bit bigger for you guys. No, that's too big. That's the limit. It's lacquered or it's shiny on the top side. And typically the ID for Ganoderma is it's a thin shelf. It's less than half the width, so that warrantly fits in that. White on the underside and lacquered on the top. So that meets the requirements. So Ganoderma would be my first guesstimate on that. Now, having said that, we're learning constantly that there are fungi that we don't know, fungi that we've never seen. So again, if the client was willing, or if your pocket's feeling rather generous, then you could potentially go out and get that identified. And if Botanic Gardens is not doing it, I'm absolutely certain the DPI in each state is doing it on a fee-for-service basis for fungi, because they've got an interest in keeping an eye on these things. Because as Peter's found out, you can have things like Kretschmeria appear where you had no thoughts. And I know that there's a DNA test being done on an infection in Sydney at the moment, and that infection is either Phylinus noxious or Kretschmeria, one of the two, and either is not a good thing to know. It's been in the Sydney region.
That's a long way south for Phylinus noxious.
A long way south for Kretschmeria. And again, it may be something that we've not seen before. There are several racipinate. Racipinate means growing along the trunk flat. So it spores out sideways. There are several racipinate Phylinus species out there. And for the sake of it, Phylinus noxious, by the way, I think some of you may know, is now Pyroderma. It's been taken out of Phylinus, thank goodness. I say thank goodness because it just doesn't fit the Phylinus model in terms of the interaction with the plant well. So calling it Pyroderma makes really good sense. But it's done for molecular reasons, not for arboricultural convenience. So
actually, talking about Phylinus noxious, the tree right next to this one is infected with Phylinus noxious. I did include a photo of that resinicate fungal fruiting body form.
I'll have a look and see if I can find that, Peter.
It's in that.
No. Oh, there it is.
One.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. I didn't even get down that far, isn't it? Hopeless, Peter. Let's see if I can move that across a bit and make that a bit bigger. I've got to be able to. 200%. No, that may be just overly optimistic. Oh, yeah, 200% I can just do. So, yes. And so it's now Pyroderma, and it is unfortunately a primary pathogen, which means it will kill the host. There's just no other way about it. And it doesn't matter whether the host is healthy or the host is unhealthy. If the host is healthy, it will make it unhealthy and then kill it. If it is unhealthy, then it will kill it. There's no middle grounds on it.
Time frame would you be looking at for that sort of dieback period?
Sorry, what was that?
What sort of time frame would you be expecting to die back in?
The literature says 4 to 6 years, but this particular tree's been infected for probably 3 years that I know of, and it still hasn't died yet. It has gone thin in the crown, and the sign of the fungus has got almost all the way around the trunk. So I think not long now.
Yeah, well,
Yes, I think, Peter, you and I saw one in Grafton about the same time, and I think within 4 years that had fallen over and hit somebody. So if you allow for a couple of years going beforehand, or maybe 3 or 4 years. So I think, again, depends on the vigor of the tree at the time and what other things are happening around. But it's a fairly quick process, and it's, as I said, almost always fatal.
But having said that, one of the treatments for brown root rot is mulch, and if you do mulch it, that can slow the progress down quite a lot.
Yeah, and it also introduces secondary fungi. So oftentimes these primary pathogens are very effective at killing living tissue, but aren't so good at dealing with adjacent dead tissue. And the adjacent fungi can bring in a whole pile of things. So there's a whole pile of soil organisms that we forget about, penicillin, other things like streptomycetes, things that we get antibiotics from are living in the soil, and encouraging them certainly has some benefits, both as a preventative and then as a slowdown, not a necessary stop. If it was a weak pathogen like Phytophthora, then yes, it makes a huge difference. You'll end up done early and managed well, you'll end up beating it. But something like a primary pathogen, Armillaria, Ludobobolina, or something like Paroderma, just a gone thing. And excuse me if every now and again I go back to Phalaenus noxious. It's hard. It's a lot harder learning it the second time than it is the first time. I wish they'd stop doing it, but I am glad they've done that one. So that's the golf course one. We've done that one. And hopefully Graham will catch that up later. Okay, this is one that Niels has sent to us, and he's really testing us on the image quality. So we're going to beat him up for that now. But this oak is a live oak, and by live oak, I'm guessing Quercus virginiana. Is that right, Niels?
the Suba or cork oak.
Quercus suba. Okay, so Quercus suba, and its leaves have all of a sudden all gone brown and hanging on. That process is marquescence, and it's not a good sign on a evergreen tree, but incredibly tolerant trees. I've got about 100 of them growing in the shade house at the moment. Over summer, one of the panels of the shade house got blown off. Whole pile of them got dried out, and I'd say probably 75% of those that have dried out have resuckered from the roots and started to regrow. So the first question is what's going wrong, and I'd start down in the roots. It's possible that it's had a lightning strike. It's possible that it's poisoning. It's possible it's gas leak. It's possible that it's water leak. All of those things all have similar symptoms, along with several fungi. Less likely to be Armillaria from where you are. Not likely to be Phalaenus.
There is a bit of a description there with it, but I think it's probably overwatered potentially. Because it's in a garden bed, and they're watering it every day all year round for like 2 hours.
Okay, yeah. Go grab yourself a soil probe.
Yep.
And see what that water. If the soil comes out and you can squeeze it in your hand and get a film of moisture in your hand, that soil is saturated. That's way too wet.
Yep.
It should.
How deep down would you dig for that?
I would go down as deep as you can in layers, maybe 100 mils at a time.
Yep.
You can get push-in type augers that to samplers that you can take, and if it's soft soil, you can take that down to a depth of about 501 push.
Yep.
Pull that out, clean it up, look at it. But you'll notice that the other thing you'll notice is the roots will either come out white, and when you take the bark off, they'll turn purple over time. They'll get a staining, and distinct staining. That will indicate anoxia for you.
Yep.
And you'll get this funny, the best way I can describe it's a greasy smell. It's an unusual.
Yep.
So those are some pretty good ways of checking for anoxia.
Yep.
And the problem is the water. Oxygen doesn't move through water well. It's 300 odd times slower than through air. So if you've got small little soil particles with gaps in it, even though there are lots of gaps, the air moves through soil reasonably quickly if you're slow breathing. And roots are very slow breathing things.
Yep.
Water is just too much of a slowdown. So again, oaks will tolerate as sort of normal ranges of weather, but they're not going to tolerate saturation, and you'll find that out. So let us know, Niels, how that one goes.
Yeah. So it's the cork oaks are kind of Mediterranean trees from memory, or like dry
That's correct. Yes.
climate. So they would that be more susceptible to saturated soils? Would that be worse for that one than, let's say, an English oak?
Well, English oak's Mediterranean too, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Most non-riparian trees and non-rainforest trees don't like lots of saturation.
Yep.
Unless they grow on a really heavy pug clay and they're used to getting periods of heavy rain. And so for us, a Mediterranean tree will get saturated soils. I mean, the western parts of Sydney is a wet winter Mediterranean soil climate. It gets wet during winter, hot and dry during summer, with these occasional wet periods. But our heavier rainfall is in the winter.
Yeah.
And I can tell you it gets to saturation point regularly. We've just been, the rain we've just had, I would say half the soils in the Cumberland Plains, more, probably 95% of the soils in the Cumberland Plains have been wetted to the point of saturation. That is, plant roots are being affected. And a lot of our trees will tolerate that. They can deal with that for a period of time. But it's interesting, up Peter's end of the world during the flooding, Lismore, was that 3 years ago now, Peter?
No, something like that.
Yeah, camphor laurels love moist soils, just adore rainforest conditions, and they get wet and saturated, and soil will be saturated for 2 or 3 days. They do not like being flooded. It's amazing seeing them along the edges of the river areas where they're dying now from the damage that was caused during that flood. Just the period of time.
My experience with camphors is that we sort of think of them as being kind of bulletproof, but their roots are actually quite susceptible to a number of problems.
And
they get fungal disease. That's my understanding is that it's similar to Phytophthora, but not exactly the same. And there's any number of instances where you can see the trees that are affected.
Yeah, look, dose is the critical thing. We talk about what can you do. Well, a little bit of lots of things isn't dangerous. For example, let's take paracetamol to a person, follow the instructions, and it's fairly safe. It's a liver toxin. Increase the dose and it starts to become quite toxic. So very different situation altogether.
With that oak tree as well, Mark, the tree owner is quite insistent on me making sure there is no pest or disease causing this, because there's a few other ones around that he doesn't want infected or whatever as well. I wasn't sure where to start with that, because obviously there's no leaves with chew marks or pest things on them.
Niels, you're fairly fairly smart guy, get online, have a look at a soil sampler, you know, figure out whether you can do it with a long drill bit or whether you can do it with just a bit of pipe, curtain rail or something like that that you hit in, grind out a section of it and go have a look. You know, ideally we'd all have all those sort of toys. Those toys take time to accumulate, and it's something you can all add to your list of things to buy. I see them now coming in from Temu, and they're a 1-inch piece is pretty easy to deal with. Graham's just joined us. Graham, we dealt with your stuff earlier, but the answer is I would pull test, not hard, but give it a bit of a pull on the trees. And if they don't seem to be moving at ground level, then I'd wait another few years and give them a pull again.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Mark,
Sorry, I was
can I
late.
just say, with the soil sampling, I bought a post hole digger from Bunnings, and that's what I use.
That's about a 4-inch or 3-inch one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, look, it's pretty big hole.
It's a big hole, yeah.
I'm really super lazy. I have a massive big Metabo percussion drill, and I have, because we test for our transplanting, I have a 1.5 meter long masonry bit that I go down to 1.5 meters in about 2 minutes flat. And then I have some hand ones that I can screw in by hand, and then I have push ones. And the push ones, if you're in soft soils, work really well for gaining your samples for that first 300 to 500 mils. So you're not mixing things up. You're actually getting the profile exactly as it is. So it's like let me see if I can find. Yeah, this is the sort of thing here. Just push that in, and that'll take a 300 mil long sample there for you. Okay, and there, look at the price. I mean, that's a horrible length. I'd want one with an extension on it because I'm lazy and I don't like that horrible thing. But that gives you an idea of what's out there. Then they make them in all different lengths. The longer they are, the more expensive they're likely. Soil test core sampler. Ignoring that. Something like this one here on the side. There you are. That's getting a little longer, and you can get them longer and longer. As that one goes 70 centimeters, that's more than adequate to do what you want to do. I don't know where they are yet. They're in Australia. So just have a hunt round. Don't trust that as being the right one to get. But it lets you know. Yeah, Graham says, don't forget dial before you dig. Again, just use common sense, guys. These tools do not have brains. You need to add your own to the equation in the mix. One of the nice things about the push type ones as opposed to battery operated is that this does take some effort, and it won't generally push through cables. It won't push through copper, so you're not going to go through gas or electricity. They will push through irrigation cable, and they will push through irrigation pipe. I can assure you I have done enough of them in my days. Yep. Anything else on that one?
I was wondering kind of what if I was to send things off for testing, like plant material. I really
I think the
wasn't sure
first
just
you've got to
what
start
to do.
eliminating. You've got to start eliminating down. If you've got wet conditions and the roots turn from white, the pull back the phloem cambium zone, and if that discolors to a purpley blue color, whilst it's exposed to the air, you can be absolutely sure you have gone through a stage of anoxia and the thing's dead.
Yeah.
Okay, and it doesn't have to be the irrigation system. I did this with a park in Parramatta that I looked at when I was a student. And I looked at it, and the first thing I said was Phytophthora, which again, this looks like, the sort of effects of a water mole.
Yeah, that was my second guess.
Yep. So I thought, oh, maybe that's what it is. Reported to the council. The council, Rob Sutton said, "Mark, you're a pain in the ass." We went out and had the soil tested 2 or 3 times, couldn't find anything, and we finally found the leaking pipe. There was a burst pipe, wasn't coming to the surface, but it was causing saturation, and ended up killing off 3 of the trees before they found the pipe. So don't just necessarily think it's the irrigation. You're going to have a pinhole leak in a pipe that's putting out, 20 or 30 litres an hour. That's not even going to be visible on the surface, but it's enough to kill a tree.
Yeah.
Okay, so some investigation.
Yeah. The client was quite kind of pushy on saying he wanted to know for sure that there was nothing, but if I can be sure that it is Anoxia, then that should probably be enough.
Phytophthora ramona is the only disease that'll be a problem. If you have it, the world's going to hate you in Australia. But as far as we know, that's not been introduced to Australia. So if you don't see any indication of physical damage, if you pull out the roots, young roots look. Let me just show you.
He did say they'd done some work to the gas pipe on the other side of the road, which is 15 meters away.
Yeah,
So
unlikely unless there was some reason for. Let's see if I can find you some young tree roots. Young tree roots should be pale, vigorous. There's a problem with, and I don't know that I'll find it, but I'll try very quickly. Switching my image database.
Are they the roots that would be the most obvious color
They're
change?
the most important diagnostically. Young, very pale-looking roots, quite small, sometimes only a millimetre or 2 in diameter. They're at the periphery of woody roots, and those roots are what you need to be looking for. Again, I'll encourage you to do an anatomy workshop at some stage, just so you can see and feel and touch these things and know.
I was booked in this year, and then you cancelled on us.
I didn't cancel. This is really unusual in terms of roots. These are proteoid roots, but see this young pale coloured root here, and even this here. If you're seeing roots looking like that, then the tree's growing well.
Okay.
If you're seeing just dark coloured ones and the bark sloughs off and all the tissue underneath the bark is brown in colour.
That's kind of similar to Phytophthora affected plants in a way.
Yep, exactly right. So here, young healthy root.
Yep.
Desiccated root, so it's dehydration. You're not likely to see that.
Yeah.
But you will see that sloughing off of the bark like you see in Phytophthora, and you won't see the young roots if you've got anoxia. This gives you an idea of what I was talking about. You see there's a purplish colour here?
Yep.
Okay, this is the anoxia going on at depth.
What?
And you can see this root here.
Fresh herbs, thank you.
That's okay. Yeah, I like it too.
Someone's got their person speaking behind them that's coming through. So yes, that's a pretty good indicator when you're pulling up roots that are like that, that are woody, that you've got a problem with anoxia. Okay.
All good.
Any
Thanks
other,
for that.
my pleasure. Any other questions that we didn't get to answer? Somebody sent me a question. Let me just see if I can find it. I think I covered them all, though.
The one that Jess forwarded to you, Mark.
Yes. Which one's that, Peter?
That's a good question.
It is a good question. Hang on a second. Any other questions from the floor whilst we're looking for that one?
So from Adam Stockdale.
Thank you. That's right. We did see it here, didn't we? We checked before.
So look for 3:54 p.m.
I don't have a 3:54, so your time is different than mine. Can you go over it with me, Peter, please? And
Hi,
I'll
Mark.
see.
I've attended your seminars last year, which I found insightful.
Yes.
And really took away from it the fact that working in with development, I'm not afraid to sever roots, etc., and lead towards the development going ahead in most cases, and working for the best outcomes for all parties, as I believe in with most decisions, the trees have responded positively over time. I track aerial and inspection photos for vigor, etc. There's a sentence for you.
Yeah.
Have you found it, or do you want me to keep going?
You can keep on going, but
However, in this case, I wanted to ask your opinion, as it's a significant red gum in the quest to sever roots totaling 300 millimetre, all relatively close to each other at 5 metres from the tree. 7 roots in total, ranging from 40 mils to 120 mils. As you taught me, it doesn't matter if we cut them at this point or closer to the tree. It's going to become redundant, probably not a lot of root loss for this size tree. However, if one limb in this scenario were to fail, it's potentially onto private dwelling.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, let's just stop there, and I think I can address this from a whole pile of different things. First of all, I don't know whether there's any causation between root severance and limb failure. There may be a correlation, but there's definitely, I'm comfortable there's no causation. And provided that you take care of the tree, I don't see that being an issue either. So in other words, cutting some roots going to be a problem. I would run the data through the root loss calculator just to give myself some idea to start off with. But at 5 metres from a 1 metre diameter red gum, and it's fairly substantial, that would be a fairly substantial tree. I'd be fairly comfortable cutting down and cutting a number of roots in that zone. Doesn't sound like he's going down to bedrock. And I can show you a picture of a teraticornis cut at 1 times trunk diameter down to bedrock. And 3 years later, the tree is looking perfectly fine. Now, I'm not saying I'll do that every time to a teraticornis. And this goes back to the point that we started the ArborMentor on tonight, and that is trees are far more tolerant than we'll allow them to be. If we would work with them rather than trying to put in these blatant lines, I don't know, Peter, but I get this recollection that you smoked at one stage. Is that right?
Yes.
Then you're dead. That sort of mentality. Now, my grandfather smoked, and he smoked a pipe most of his life up until the age of 99. He walked across the Harbour Bridge every day once he moved to Australia after he outlived his 3rd wife. And he died at 99 when he had some real pains. They realised it was his gallbladder. They opened him up and found him riddled with cancer, and he was gone a day later. I think finding out that he had cancer is probably what killed him, not the cancer itself. But it just is that point. We come up with these rules, and then nature constantly tells us that they're just guidelines. And so 12 times trunk diameter for a protection zone is a starting point. In fact, I mentioned to a number of you before that before it was 12 times, it used to be 10 times before the Americans decided that inches and feet were better in 12, and the POMs got overruled on 1 centimetre, 10 centimetres as a shape. The protection zone was a little smaller. In fact, it was increased by 44% to do with the fact that Americans are basically innumerate. No offense to any Americans online, and I want to have hate mail. But yeah, when you have a metric system, it just made sense to be metric. And so when we are allowed to have a 10% or a 20%, and I'm telling you 20% is on the way, when you have a 20% encroachment, it really isn't that bad. In fact, 20% is 6 times trunk diameter as a tangent. So if you've got a 1 metre tree cutting at 6 metres is a 20% incursion. And I think when you see the new standard, the committee made clear that a 20% or greater incursion requires, some root investigation. And certainly what we hear from that account is that there has been a root investigation. Whack it through the calculator. The root loss calculator is there for you to use for that reason. Let's get an idea of what you're looking at going. I had someone send me one not so long ago. In fact, he was online last time round. I don't know who we've got online at the moment. Got any other mentors online? No. Okay. Jeremy Young was online. He was involved in that process, and the roots that were cut, there was about 130% roots cut, and you can't do that mathematically. What it turned out is this tree just had an exceptionally large amount of root biomass, and the amazing thing is the tree is still alive. I'm just forever amazed about how tolerant trees are. Now, I do want to clarify one thing, and that is if I had the chance to leave that root at 5 metres rather than cut it back to the trunk, I would leave it at 5 metres. Whatever point you cut that root, the roots between the cut point and the trunk can develop new roots. So new roots form randomly. There's no root meristematic traces, no buds. They just randomly form. And they will form from the end, as Peter has shown you, and we've seen it lots of times, but they also form back and behind. And they do that constantly through the life of the tree. So you have smaller woody roots come off the main root system, and they'll die off. They won't survive, and they'll start again, and they'll go through. And that's how it reuses the area from the trunk out, is this cycling of, shorter-lived woody roots. So hopefully that makes sense. If I had a choice, I would leave it at the 5 metre length, even though if there was no root division in behind, with the hope that we'd get some root division in behind as well as from the end. And how would you stimulate it better?
Bit of water.
Actually, just sounds wrong, doesn't it? But Neil's, not too much water. Dose is important. I can prove that. I'm up Cairns at the moment, and I know that a bit of water is good, but I'm guaranteeing if I put your head under the water and leave it there for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, that it probably won't be so good. So dose is the critical component. It's the Goldilocks zone, and it's knowing or finding out what that is for a tree is really useful. So what Peter and I both know, for example, from camphor laurel, is that the Goldilocks zone is not long-term saturation. Short-term saturation is tolerable, but Goldilocks zone for camphor laurel is moist but not wet. Ficus, much the same, moist but not wet, but ficus will tolerate longer inundation than camphor laurel. And it's the same the other way. My local council planted Eucalyptus microcories, which is a water-preferring tree from the margins of wet sclerophyll forests. and planted amongst Eucalyptus mollicana and Eucalyptus teraticornis. And when the drought hit, the mollicana and the teraticornis said, "We will take the water. We can get it." The microcories said, "I can get it too." And all of a sudden, one day, the microcories realized that they've been outcompeted within a matter of a month. Every microcories in the park died. And these were trees that were 30 or 40 centimeters in diameter, just could not outperform those that are endemic to the zone. So the Goldilocks zone, if we can think about that when we're talking about plant selection and plant management. So Niels, you have to figure that out for your cork oak as well. What's too wet, what's too dry. Most Mediterranean trees will take some saturation, but there's a difference between some saturation and a month or two of saturation. My yard is wet at the moment, but within 2 weeks it'll be dry. So that's what you've got to weigh up. If there's no other questions, call it a good night, and we'll see you again in a few weeks' time.